Hi, and thanks for joining us for This Week in Evansville. I'm Johnny Kincaid. Sure do appreciate you making us a part of your week. Be sure that you hit the like button if you like what you see, and that you subscribe so that you can keep up to date with future episodes of This Week in Evansville. We're going to start this week on a sad note to acknowledge the passing of Tell City Police Officer Heather Glenn, who died in the line of duty. Our condolences to her family and to her many friends. Now, this week on the show, we are joined by Curtis Hill, former Attorney General in the state of Indiana, who is now running for governor. First of all, what crossed your mind to make you decide that you're going to run for governor?
Well, Johnny, I've been involved in public service most of my life. I started out as a prosecuting attorney for a number of years, and then I moved on to the Attorney General's office. And what I have determined about myself is that I'm at my best when I'm serving others. And I look at what's going on in this nation. I look at what's going on in our state. We have the weaponization of justice. We've got the weaponization of race, reclassification of gender. We've got objective truth on the run. And so it's important for those of us who believe in self-evident truths to stand up and be counted. It's my responsibility and obligation to do whatever I can to lead that effort. So based upon my history as a prosecutor, my history of leadership as the Attorney General for the state of Indiana, I decided that it was an opportunity to put my skills to work for the state of Indiana and the state I love.
Now, in making this announcement, it's obvious that people have very strong feelings one way or another about Curtis Hill. For those who are supporters, they are really gung-ho for the fact that you're running. But you also have some detractors out there. And some of the things that are being said are, for example, of course, this is somebody you wouldn't expect to hear anything kind out of anyway, but the Indiana Democratic Party chairman says he has proven that he is unfit to serve and wrong for Hoosiers. What do you have to say to somebody who's coming out with that statement?
Well, I would certainly expect that to come from someone on the left side of the aisle. I'm well known for my popularity as a conservative, as a crusader for public accountability. We've done that. I was a champion for life in many ways. So it doesn't shock me that Democrats would come out with guns ablazing. And I think that's an indication that they're a little bit afraid. And ever since I've been engaged in public service, I've been a threat to a variety of people. I've been a threat to folks in the Democrat Party who are deathly afraid of a black conservative being successful. And quite frankly, Johnny, I've been a threat to some of the folks in our Republican Party who are concerned about giving up the irons of leadership themselves. So my message is going directly to the people. The people can determine who I am, what I am. I have a record that I stand on. Record of service as the most aggressive prosecutor in the state of Indiana, aggressive and yet fair, and my record as Attorney General speaks for itself.
Okay, so you mentioned some of the detractors even within your own party.
Sure.
And you faced that when going before the convention wanting to run for re-election for Attorney General, right?
That's correct. Yeah, we had, there was, and it's not the Republican Party. You have certain people in positions of leadership who are threatened, who are jealous, who have their own agenda, and they work behind the scenes. The convention in 2020 was very interesting because they changed the rules, and we've complained about that on the national level. Changing the rules in midstream doesn't exactly adhere to fairness, but they did change the rules in the midstream and went to a virtual convention. And a virtual convention favors the second and third tier candidates. So it was, in my estimation, there was certainly an effort to do what they could to put a lid on things. And that's why it's really important now that we have an opportunity to take our message and take this opportunity directly to the people in a primary process. So the entire state of Republicans can make a determination as opposed to 1,800 delegates.
Okay. And within the Republican Party, one of the things, at least that I've noticed, is that we're starting to see more kind of different groups or factions forming within the party, that you're seeing some people who are now figuring out how that power within the party works, and they're figuring out ways to put themselves at a better advantage, instead of kind of always tailing behind leadership. And in the next few years, I think in the Republican Party, you're going to see some big changes taking place. Do you see that on the horizon too?
Well, we're certainly hoping so. We need to have change. The Republicans complain a lot about the people that are in leadership, and yet oftentimes return those same pasty people back to the powers of office. I've seen Lincoln days where leadership in the General Assembly has come and talked about all sorts of conservative points of view because it plays well for the Lincoln Day crowd, and then they go back to Indianapolis and they do the exact opposite, and yet people continue to put them back in office. So what's imperative is that the grassroots, the people, the members of the party who pay attention, track and identify what these people are doing. If they're doing something correct, if they're adhering to your value system, then by all means support that person. But if they are different, if they say one thing today and do one thing tomorrow, it's incumbent upon the voters to hold them accountable. So we do this to ourselves. Oftentimes we get saddled with poor leadership, and we have nobody to blame but ourselves because we continue to put the same old into office. So to your point, it would be very refreshing to have change, and the kind of change. It's interesting because conservatives don't seemingly talk about change a lot, but what we need to have is the change that says we will do what we say we will do, we will speak the truth, and we will stand and fight for conservative principles. That means that we collaborate when necessary. We understand that being in service means to cooperate with not only our side but the other side. But we need to stand firm with our principles, and we haven't seen that happen in the Indiana Republican Party.
Yeah, we seem to be missing that. I mean, we have a supermajority. There should be more positive things going for the state than what we currently have.
Well, you know what happens when you have a supermajority? You have folks that are spending more time worried about stepping on each other's toes and making each other look good than going forward with aggressive legislation. Sometimes it's easier to have opposition, an opposition party to be able to flank off of. And when you don't have that, then you're left fighting with yourselves. And a lot of what happens in Indiana becomes sort of mushy because that supermajority is busy trying to make sure that it doesn't look messy. And you saw that with the Dobbs decision. When Roe v. Wade was tossed out, it was interesting that we had many state legislators and in fairness, legislators all over the country that were caught flat-footed, not really understanding what their position in a post-Roe v. Wade world would look like. Going into the election cycles, it was all, I'm pro-life, I'm pro-life, I'm pro-life. But because Roe v. Wade was in place, no one ever had to define strictly what that meant. So all of a sudden, Roe v. Wade goes away, and you've got these Republicans all over the board trying to determine what their position is and trying to figure out how to land rather than to position themselves from their heart and be authentic. And so that's the kind of change we need. We need people who are going to be authentic, not worried about which way the wind's blowing, but follow their heart and follow their passion.
What do you think needs to happen in Indiana for the sanctity of life?
Well, I think we're on the right path with a prohibition against abortion, but I think it goes further than that. It's not just a matter of making someone adhere to a policy that there won't be any abortions. We have to create a culture of life. We need to be in a position to provide persuasive evidence to individuals who find themselves in a situation of an unwanted pregnancy to understand that life is the right choice, because it's always going to be a choice. If somebody wants an abortion bad enough, they're going to figure out a way to get it. And unfortunately, around the country, there are various states and the federal government that are certainly doing what they can to allow people who couldn't otherwise get an abortion get one someplace else. So we have to understand that that's still a problem. We need to make sure that we can persuade folks that the real question with life is this: at what point do we no longer protect a human being? At what point do we no longer protect a human life? And when we start to answer that question, the question ought to be, at the point where we can define a human life, it needs to be protected. I mean, that's the answer. But not a lot of people think that. There's often people who have been given the Kool-Aid that says it's not a life, it's a clump of cells, And so therefore they don't have any problem with killing a clump of cells or a non-human entity. And that's because they've been convinced that what's living inside them is not alive and is not human and is therefore not worth protecting. That's what the ultimate answer is for us as conservatives. We need to get to those folks and make sure they understand what's growing inside of them.
People in the media are referring to this as a very crowded field for the run for governorship in Indiana. You are now the fifth candidate into the race, right? We have Suzanne Crouch, of course. We have Mike Braun, Eric Doden, Jamie Rittenauer, and you. The first three of those are considered the front runners, right? Then they've each raised about $3 million as of the beginning of the year. So we know that those war chests are a little bit bigger now, obviously, than they were at that point. So that's a lot of money. There's a lot at stake in this governor's race.
It's a lot of money, and I suppose if people in Indiana are cool with someone being able to buy an election, then having enough money work. I'll remind you that Hillary Clinton raised a lot more money than Donald Trump did in 2016, but she didn't win. So we have lots of examples of money being driven to a point where, it's an advantage to have, but it still comes down to who are we selecting. I liken the situation to one of my favorite stories from the Bible, David and Goliath. If I'm armed with the faith in God and 5 smooth stones, I can get anything accomplished. And in this particular instance, we have just that. It's about what is the vision that we would have for the state of Indiana? What is it that we bring to the table? It's interesting, for any of the folks who are running for office, having a record of service as an elected official puts a lot of things on the table. You don't have to see Curtis Hill in a vacuum saying, I'm conservative this and I'm conservative that. Curtis Hill has a record. So all you have to do is you have to look up my AG opinions. You can look up the lawsuits that we handled. You can look up the articles that I've written that have laid out and spelled out specifically where I'm at on particular points of view. It's out there. It's clear. So when people are looking for a proven conservative leader, they can look at the folks who have a record and say, I believe this person will be this way, or I don't believe that person will be that way, or this person isn't really defined. I don't know how they're going to be. And I would certainly suggest in a field that we have at this point, there's plenty of opportunity to examine the candidates and make a determination of who do you think has the strength and the courage to lead through what's going to be challenging times ahead.
This is it's rare, first of all, in to be in the situation where right now we have 2 Southern Indiana candidates for governor, which since I've been in Indiana, I haven't seen that happen before. But also, they're very distinctly different, and some people would say, because Mike Braun has been, up until your candidacy, considered kind of the de facto conservative in the run. And so now, what do you bring that Mike Braun isn't bringing to this?
Well, one thing that I can think of in particular is my massive support for law enforcement. And not just support for law enforcement, the understanding that you have to invest in law enforcement to have a meaningful public safety apparatus. I think we've had some clear distinctions between my position and his position. We give police officers a charge. We say, here's a gun, here's a badge, please protect us. And in doing so, that requires that police officer to be trained and to be ready to go at a moment's notice. They may have to knock down a door. They may have to swing into action. And guess what, Johnny? Sometimes they make mistakes. Sometimes they make honest mistakes. Now, some of their mistakes go beyond honest mistakes and have to be evaluated. As a prosecutor, I had the unfortunate duty of evaluating police officers that I had to prosecute and send to jail. I also had the evaluation of police officers, and we were able to exonerate them from criminal wrongdoing. So if a cop goes too far, certainly criminal accountability should be applied. But for open and honest mistakes, we have to be able to insulate them. A police officer shouldn't have to be faced with a decision of what am I going to do next? And boy, if I screw this up, I'm going to lose my house. Now that's not, and that position doesn't hurt the victim of the screw up, because the municipality or the state or the county, whichever police organization is employing that police officer, is still liable for any kind of occurrences that they take on their behalf. But to make sure that we provide personal insulation to police officers so that we can encourage more police officers to apply, so that we can encourage these departments to be able to be strong and fearless in defense of their duties.
And, police officers have a lot to worry about.
Oh.
The liability thing is one of the things we don't necessarily think about, but they're always worried about the safety factors. And, here in Southern Indiana right now, we're mourning the loss of one of those officers. We had a police officer in Tell City that was involved in an incident at a local healthcare facility where she lost her life, and the community is mourning that right now, and it's part of the reality of that job. And I guess we need to do more to try to attract those people and bring in those officers who are going to do the right thing for the right reasons.
We absolutely have to do that. A moment's hesitation because you're worried about how this will play out in the newspaper or how this will play out in a courtroom. That momentary hesitation could cost a police officer their life or a innocent bystander their life. So we have to do everything that we can to make sure that police officers understand that we have their back as much as they have ours.
Now, moving on to the campaign itself for a minute here. I know that the money aspect is a daunting task, but I also know that you're hitting the road, right? And going out and shaking as many hands as you possibly can.
Well, that's absolutely correct. I mean, money helps you to connect in a particular way, but there's no substitution for connecting personally with voters and members of the community. So we are hitting the road. We're doing a wide sweep around the entire state, just a quick touch, if you will. But to let people know that we're out there, that we're accessible, we want to listen. It's a long campaign, even at this point, and our opportunity now is to get with folks, find out what their needs and interests are. I've already heard from many folks who place it as a priority that they want a proven conservative in charge of the game. That's what they're after. Now, as we travel around, we'll talk to folks about, well, what does that mean to you? And identify ways in which we may fit that bill. For me, it's the fun part of a campaign, getting to know people. You mentioned that there were two candidates that are from the South, from Southern Indiana. As much as I've traveled in Southern Indiana, I feel like I'm from Southern Indiana. And then the reception that I've always received from Southern Indiana has been A1 all across the board. And it's always interesting how people think that, geographically, this person's from here and this person's from there. The reality is, from tip to stern, we have one set of Hoosiers. We have a commonality, particularly among conservatives in the state of Indiana. So it doesn't matter if you're from Elkhart or from Evansville. You have a same value system that connects up very, very well. And so we've been able to, over the past several years, be able to connect up with folks from all over the state, basically relying on our shared common conservative value system.
In fact, the first time that you and I met was in 2016, when you were running for Attorney General, and you were doing a meet and greet at the FOP in Evansville. And so I know firsthand that you make those rounds to go and do those meet and greets. So you're going to be back in Evansville this week on Thursday, right?
Yes, we're making a sweep. We're starting from the north, and then we'll swing down. And as you mentioned, we'll be in Evansville on Thursday, I believe, at 11 o'clock Central. My good friend, Senator Toms, is going to be guest hosting us down there. And he's a fantastic, I can't say enough wonderful things about Jim Toms. And I hope your listeners understand what a champion you have in Jim in the Indiana State Senate. He goes against the leadership when it's necessary to go against the leadership. And he's always fighting for the cause of the little guy. He's just a fantastic person, and if you ever heard him tell a story, which I'm sure you've had, the guy can just capture you. So he and Margie are dear friends of mine. I'm looking forward to seeing them again. And we'll be in Evansville. And then I'm not sure where we're springing forth. We've got several locations between now and Friday. We'll land back in St. Joe County on a loop up in north and have a bit of a bash at that point.
The appearance on Thursday, just checking my memory here, but I believe it's at the Pie Pan.
Yes.
Which is in North Park in Evansville, 11 o'clock, and want to invite people to come out if you want an opportunity to meet with Curtis and talk to him, get some of his feedback on what he envisions for the state of Indiana. You can do that certainly at the Pie Pan on Thursday.
So absolutely, they can do that at the Pie Pan, and they can also go online and look at curtishill.com to find out more information about our candidacy, as well as to take an opportunity to donate. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is for folks to get engaged with a donation. And even the smallest amount, we need to make sure that people are documented as engaged in this process as grassroots supporters. And so I would certainly urge your listeners to get involved. If it's $5, it's $5, but get involved and be a part of the process.
Yeah, those little donations add up for anybody who's running for office.
Yes, sir.
This is the long haul. I mean, we are still not to, the first of the year for election year. We're midway through the year before, and all of the candidates for governor are on the ground, and they're running and they're charging hard at trying to rally some votes up for them.
Well, by no means is the fat lady saying, and I know that there may be some folks in this race that pretty much we're measuring the curtains at 2:06 in the governor's office. I think everybody ought to slow down and take an understanding that we've got a long time to go here and a great opportunity for us to be able to connect with folks across the state. I look forward to sharing the stage with the other individuals who are looking to run for governor and give people a nice little opportunity to compare. And from my standpoint, when I'm looking for leadership, I'm looking for a person. I'm thinking, would I like to share a foxhole with this person? If we're getting fired upon, can I comfortably rely on this person to have my back while I have their back? Or if somebody jumps out of that foxhole, am I going to follow this person, or am I going to run the other way? That's sort of my basic way of doing things, and I think we have a great opportunity to compare histories, records, and rhetoric to determine who's going to be the best shape to lead Indiana into the future.
And there are differences. That's what everybody has to understand. This is not a group of people that all come from the same ideology. These are folks with differences, and there are some very distinct belief systems at play here that we should be looking at.
Well, also, Johnny, not only distinctive schools of thought that people have, but also in willingness to engage. What is the candidate's willingness to engage in the status quo? Are you willing to piss off the leadership because you've got a position that supports the people, or are you comfortable and worried about how it's going to look? That's always been a litmus test that I look after. Not to say that you don't get along. You certainly want to get along with folks, but we have to look at who we're serving. We're serving the interests of the people of the state of Indiana, and so we should always put them first and foremost in our minds. And oftentimes we see political figures that don't want to say something that will irritate somebody, and therefore blah blah blah. And then you wonder why you get goofy laws in place. Well, I didn't want to raise my hand. I didn't want to start trouble. We had that with the needle exchange program when I was Attorney General. The governor and the General Assembly were going off to say we're going to stop opioid overdoses with a needle exchange, and I pointed out the truth that if you whether you have a clean needle or a dirty needle, you still have the same opportunity for an overdose. So don't have the illusion of thinking that an addict can take one dirty needle and then end up getting 30 clean needles, that they're going to sit there and use each clean needle going forward. Here's what they're going to do, Johnny. They're going to use that one dirty needle. They're going to sell the other 29 needles for more dope, and the risk of overdose is just as bad, if not worse. We simply spoke the truth about what was happening there. Not that we were against the concept of getting clean needles to people, but clean needles were not going to have any impact on overdoses in the state of Indiana. Let's speak the truth about it. And when you speak the truth, you ruffle feathers, because people like to hide behind little, let's put this low-hanging fruit of a needle exchange program, and that's what we're doing about opioid deaths, and which was nothing. It was doing nothing for opioid deaths. So my point is, you have to be willing to speak the truth and back it up. And I think that we've had a history of that throughout my career.
And in looking at some of the topics that you're willing to tackle, you're certainly going to be ruffling feathers. The stands that you'll take on gender ideology and on critical race theory, those are hot button issues right now, that even though you may have a constituency that is in your corner, the media certainly isn't going to be in your corner on those issues.
No. Well, the media plays a role. Unfortunately, they're no longer, if they ever were referees, they certainly take a side. But you mentioned something like CRT, critical race theory. What's important for us is not to just as a party say, well, I'm against critical race theory, because what happens is, in the Black community in particular, they hear that, and what they hear is, you don't want to talk about race. You don't want to have an honest conversation about race. So what we have to do is make sure, and that's what I'm going to do, we absolutely have to have honest conversations about race, our race history in this country. There's no question about that. That's not the part of critical race theory that's offensive. The part about critical race theory that's offensive is the idea of oppressors and victims, of creating an atmosphere where all white people are oppressors no matter what they've done, and all Black people are victims, and instilling this attitude in our children. That's a particular strain of that process that we have to do away with. So part of my responsibility as I bring these issues up is to try to do as best I can to speak intelligently about the issues and frame the issues properly, so we don't just get excited and bomb the soundbite, but we peel back the layers and understand what the issues are and how we can bring these points together, how we can use them as a bridge to be more effective in our race relations, which is what we absolutely need to do, and do so in a manner that brings people together. We want to be unified. We have to be unified as a party, as a nation, in order to be the America that the world ultimately will need.
All right. We've kind of hit on the media a little bit here, and that brings us to the elephant in the room, because when you announced, the media pulled up old news, and frankly, I was surprised at some of the headlines. The Washington Post immediately went to talking about the incident in 2018, the supposed groping incident, as they referred to it. Indiana Public Radio. Did you see the headline that they had?
No, I didn't. Let
me share this with you, because this blew my mind when I read it. Curtis Hill, who the Indiana Supreme Court said battered 4 women, runs for governor. That's the headline on Indiana Public Radio. What do you have to say to, first of all, just the story itself, and then the fact that old news is what's coming back in the announcement?
Well, it goes back to what I said before, Johnny. I'm a threat. I am a big threat to a lot of people, and I was a target from day one when I, not just when I became Attorney General, but when I won the office. Keep in mind, I had 1.6 million votes at that time. I had the highest vote total in the history of the state, and I scared a lot of people, including people in my own party, in terms of, well, can we control this guy? So that process has been placed. When you're a popular conservative that stands up against the status quo, you're going to get hit. From the Democrat standpoint, they'd hate to see me. I might find the secret sauce to get more Blacks engaged in the Republican Party. You imagine that? That could be a real dent in there. So it's no surprise that I've been a threat to certain individuals. But from my perspective, I guess I could acknowledge these attacks and say, well, gee, I'm going to play it safe. I'm going to step back and let somebody else do that. I don't need to take the heat. I don't need to hear all this aggravation. But there's a saying that I'm very fond of, and that's that ships are safe in the harbor, but that's not what they're built for. And there's a time that has come upon us where we need a certain type of leadership that can stand up against this type of assault. And if we don't have the kind of leaders that are willing to stand up and take this kind of abuse and push it back and move forward and continue to do the work that's designed for them, well, then we're going to be lost. So I choose to go forward, and that's what my plan is.
Curtis, thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank
I know
you.
that you've got a very busy schedule with travel. We'll look for seeing you here in Evansville on Thursday, and we'll keep up with you on the campaign trail.
Thank you, buddy. I appreciate it. You take care of yourself.
All right. Thank you much, Curtis. Big thanks to Curtis Hill for being a part of this week's show. Once again, be sure that you subscribe so that you don't miss out on future episodes of This Week in Evansville. We've got great things on the way. We'll be talking to all of the gubernatorial candidates in the future here on the show. We're going to be talking to city council candidates for the city of Evansville as well, and we've got a lot of other great guests lined up for you. So don't miss out. Be sure to subscribe to This Week in Evansville, and we'll see you on our next episode next week.